Good morning. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about triangles. We're going to have two videos. The first one we're going to talk about classifying triangles, and then the second one we're going to talk about the triangle sum theorem and the triangle inequality theorem. So let's get right to classifying triangles. There are two ways that we classify triangles. So every triangle has two names. Well, except with the exception of one. There's one that has four names. But we're not really going to go into that. We're really only going to talk about its two names. Anyway, so the first part of its name has to do with the classification based on its angles. The second part of its name has to do with the classification of its sides. Now sometimes you'll have the sides classification first and then the angle classification second. I tend to do the angle sides, but just know that it could be either way. It could be flipped around. It's still the same thing. All right, so we're going to talk about angles. We're going to talk about triangles by the angles first. My recommendation, what I always tell my students is, look for the largest angle. Whatever that largest angle is, that's the type of triangle. So for instance, if you look at the largest angle and you find that it is acute, has an acute measurement, then the triangle is an acute triangle. So what does acute mean? Well, that means that the angle measures between 0 and 90 degrees. So angle measures between 0 and 90 degrees. I'm not going to take the time to put in the little degree marks, but just know that they're supposed to have the degree marks. All right, so what does that look like? It looks something like this. Okay? It doesn't have to look exactly like that, but it looks something similar to that. Okay, the next one is when you look at the largest angle and you see that it has that little box in there, that means it's a right triangle, because the largest angle is a right angle, which means it measures exactly 90 degrees. Okay? So what does that look like? I know you guys know what that looks like, but we're going to just draw it for kicks and giggles. There we go. Don't forget that little box. That's what I call the right angle indicator. And that means that that angle is a right angle. All right, and then the last type of triangle classification by angles is the obtuse. So if you look at the largest angle and you see that it is obtuse, in other words, it measures between 90 and 180, then you got an obtuse triangle. So angle measures between 90 and 180. So it's going to look something similar to this. So it's really opened up wide. All right, let's look at the sides. What I always recommend for the kids is to look for the congruency marks. Sometimes you have the angles that have the side measurements, which is great because then without a doubt, we know exactly what those measurements are. We can classify it by that. But sometimes we don't, and we have the little tick marks. Those are called congruency marks. So sometimes you're going to have to look for the congruency marks. And if you see that it has three congruency marks, but they're, each side has congruency marks, but they're all different numbers of congruency marks, that means it's a scaling triangle. In other words, all sides, whoops, sorry, there we go. All, sides have different lengths. Okay? So let's draw it. And then the congruency marks would look like this. Okay? So as you can see, one side has one, another side has two, the other third side has three. They all have different number of congruency marks, so that means they are all different. The next one is isosceles. So let me switch back over text. Oops. which means that two sides are the same. So two sides have the same length. So an example was this. I always like to make it upside down so that it resembles an ice cream cone, because isosceles triangles resemble ice cream cones or icicles, although we don't have icicles too much around here, but ice cream cones. All right, and then the last one is our equilateral, in which all the sides have the same length. All sides. So it's going to look like this. Okay? All right, so let's go on down to these two guys right here, and we will classify them. So, like I said, I like to classify them by their angles first. First thing I see is the right angle indicator. So immediately that signals to me that I have a right triangle. Now I'm going to look at the sides, and I see that two of the sides have one congruency mark, so it looks similar. It looks like the isosceles triangle. So since two sides are the same, the third side is different. It is isosceles. Looking at the next one, this one does not have any measurements whatsoever. It doesn't even have any congruency marks. But this one is one where you can really tell that the largest angle is obtuse, and that all of the sides are different. So that would make it an obtuse scalene. Whoops. Okay. All right. All right. This is the end of video part 1. Come back for video part 2 for triangle sum and triangle inequality. Catch you on the flip side.